Well, 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 it is always Donnie and Dolly. Let's go out there and talk about one of the latest updates from Rick Dhaliwal from earlier today on 11:05 on the dot. A new possible trade partner for the Vancouver Canucks and JT Miller. Rick Dhaliwal shared what he was hearing in Donnie and Dolly's opening segment. As always, this show that you're watching is brought to you by ExpressVPN. Go out there and check the first link in the description for some free months on your VPN and help out the channel all in the process. Also, this video clip will be in the description as well, because, of course, this has the scoop that we are looking at from Rick Dhaliwal. Because I don't want to play the clip, though, it's copyrighted material, we're going over onto Canucks News Summaries, who went out there and summarized the first segment of Rick Dhaliwal's show. Take a look at this, Donnie and Dolly, yada yada yada. Here is what Dhaliwal ended up talking about. Vancouver Canucks. Teams are still calling on Miller and Pettersson. Number 2, the Canucks had 2 scouts at the Rangers game, and they also had a scout at the Devils versus the Flyers game. So with that in mind, Canucks scouting the Rangers, Canucks scouting the Devils and or the Flyers? Maybe it's just New Jersey, thinking about some sort of a package to bring another Hughes, bro. How about ya? Dhaliwal thinks the Avalanche could be a possibility for a JT Miller trade. They need a centerman, and Casey Mittelstadt hasn't been great. A couple of years ago, Dhaliwal said, the Canucks and Avalanche talked about a trade involving Miller, which would have involved Alex Newhook and Bowen Byram going back to Vancouver. Dhaliwal said, though, he doesn't know why that deal never materialized, but we're along. The deal was along, that's what the point is making here. He wonders if Miller would be waving to go there, despite preferring East Coast teams. The Canucks are looking for a top 4 D-man, but the prices are very high. Teams want a first-round pick and Willander, and the Canucks will not do that trade. When you consider the fact that Tom Willander could very well be a top 4 defenseman as soon as next season, yeah, okay, makes sense why the Canucks don't want to make that sort of a trade. Imagine a first and Willander? Hell nah. Anyways, I wanted to dive into this apparent Canucks and Avalanche trade situation that was talked about here. We did see ourselves that one Twitter post that said that JT Miller would have waived for Colorado, and the reason that post was interesting is because the poster was the guy who successfully predicted Taylor Hall getting traded over to the Carolina Hurricanes. Let's see if we can find it here. It's somewhere in my bookmarks. Here it is. So it's from Ice Talk. As I've said earlier, the Rangers most likely won't land Miller. Put a fork in them. The Colorado Avalanche are coming in hot. As I've also said, the Canucks would like a center in return, and with the cap space the Avs have with current injuries to the roster, they could make it work. Miller obviously has a no trade, but is intrigued with the possibility of playing with one of the best players in the game in Nathan MacKinnon. This is essentially what Rick Dhaliwal said on today's episode of Donnie and Dolly, but this tweet was posted back on January 25th. As we had said, this is the same dude that was predicting that Taylor Hall gets traded to Carolina, and then the trade actually happened. So this was a guy whose tweets are no longer just fantasy dust. We actually do have to pay attention to this dude, at least I think so. Anyways, with Colorado already being labeled as a team that JT Miller could head over to, with Rick Dhaliwal saying the same thing here, it does bring itself up as a potential option. Now, Canucks News Summaries did summarize some of the extra thoughts about this. In case you're wondering, the Avalanche have about $4.76 million in cap space. They are using LTIR due to Landeskog and Pullman's contract. In order to facilitate a trade with them, they would need to send out about $4 million. This is purely my speculation, but the Canucks were rumored to have liked Ross Colton before he was traded to Colorado. He has a $4 million cap hit and is signed for 2 more seasons. He has a full no trade for this season, however. Go Avs go, JT Miller, Canucks, Casey Mittelstadt, and Ross Colton. Does this trade make sense for both sides? I can't see the Canucks taking on cap to get worse. And that, of course, is something that I don't think would work either. Casey Mittelstadt and Ross Colton are both players that I have liked at different parts of their careers individually, but together, for JT Miller, hell no, unless you're adding 2 first-round picks and another prospect, that in which the Colorado Avalanche don't actually seem to have many of. This kind of a trade does not seem like it's going to work out. Let's talk about some of the assets involved, though. JT Miller, on pace for 63 points this season, 35 points in 40 games played, was not named a captain or an alternate at the Four Nations USA team announcement. Quinn Hughes also wasn't named anything either, which is kind of weird, to be honest. But JT Miller, of course, 99 points in 21-22, had a down year in 22-23, but it was still over a point per game. This season, everybody was talking about how he should get traded because he was pissy and he wasn't playing and he wasn't back-checking well. Everybody knew JT wasn't his best in that season, but he bounced back with a 100-point campaign the season after, before declining once again. Now, this point production isn't the worst in the world, but for a guy who is 32 years old, making $8 million a year till the end of 29-30, obviously there is some difficulty there. Now, thinking about the next Colorado and Vancouver trade, Alex Newhook and Bowen Byram coming back over to Vancouver in some sort of a deal. It's interesting because Newhook, of course, is a Stanley Cup champion asset that the Colorado Avalanche had in their playoff run in 2022. Newhook also is a Montreal Canadien, who is unfortunately not really progressing all too much. This season he's on pace for 22 points. Last year he had 34 points in 55 games only. So Newhook hasn't had necessarily the steadiest of progression. He's still trying to find his identity in Montreal. Bowen Byram is in Buffalo, and it's funny because he's linked to Vancouver once again in Elias Pettersson trade talk. So if we would have seen, let's say, JT Miller for Newhook and Byram 2 years ago maybe, that sort of a deal would have been super intriguing to me because I would have liked to see the potential for both of these guys. However, unfortunately, with Newhook not really taking the next step and Byram finding himself in another trade position in Buffalo instead, the entire conversation seems to have come full circle. Now, I do actually like Bowen Byram. I would like to see him in Vancouver in some capacity. Hopefully the Canucks are able to get more than just Byram and Cousins in a Pettersson trade with Buffalo, but Byram and Newhook for Miller? Maybe back 2 years ago that would have been seen as fair value. It's just now we had seen Miller actually get a 100-point season and be a total force in the National Hockey League. Maybe it's not too good of a value deal now. Taking a look at some of the other assets that we have discussed here, Ross Colton is a name that was super interesting because he's on pace for 30 points in 65 games. Roughly half a point a game, right? Last year he had 40 points in 80 games played. He's making $4 million a year till the end of 2027. The reason Ross Colton is interesting is because at the start of this season, the guy was literally one of the best point producers in the league. He had 2 points against Columbus, a point against Boston, 2 points against Anaheim, 2 against San Jose, and he scored goal after goal after goal before getting injured. This opening part of the season saw Ross Colton put up in, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 games, 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 points in 10 games, with most of them, actually, all but one of them, being goals. This dude was one of the top goal scorers in the NHL because he was playing with Rantanen and McKinnon. And even though he did find himself on the shelf for a bit, he ended up coming back and not scoring nearly the same amount of points in the second half of the season. There still is an intriguing element to Ross Colton's game as an energy agitator-like force who does have some goal-scoring touches when you put him with the right guys. I'm trying to brainstorm, what could Ross Colton look like with Elias Pettersson? Like, if you put anybody else with McKinnon and Rantanen, would they have been able to produce as much as Ross Colton does? This guy had such a good run to open out the year. I don't want to make it seem like 10 games defines the entire guy's value, but still, there is reason to believe that there might be more than meets the eye with this player and his overall point production. You think about some of the other names, Casey Mittelstadt has sort of declined a bit. I mean, 49 points on pace for it, that's not bad, but it's certainly not the 59-point pace that he had in 2022-2023. Heck, even last year, the guy had 47 points in 62 games. This year, he hasn't necessarily lived up to expectations. I'm also thinking about prospects. If you want to talk about a guy, Callum Ritchie was super good in the OHL this season, 48 points in 26 games played and 50 points last year. He's looking like he could be a really good stud, but ultimately, I mean, the Avalanche don't have many prospects, so thinking about what a Miller trade could look like with Colorado, if it's Mittelstadt, Callum Ritchie, and some picks, I honestly think about that. If it's Callum Ritchie, Ross Colton, and even more picks, I think about that too. If it's all three of the players and maybe an extra pick, I think about that as well, but of course, salary be damned, the Vancouver Canucks might not want to take on $4 million for Colton plus an extra 5.7 for Casey Mittelstadt. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. What are your thoughts about the entire Colorado JT Miller trade idea? And do you see some sort of a Ross Colton or a Casey Mittelstadt being an appropriate trade return? Let me know in the comments what are your opinions about this entire situation. I hope you enjoyed this video, and bye.